Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mount Rushmore National Memorial. Just a few last announcements before the 9 o'clock program. First of all, those of you that have come in late, as you probably have figured out, the program is taking place at the beginning of the Avenue of Flags, not in the amphitheater. That is due to a technical difficulty with our speaker system. The speakers are only working down at this end of the park right now. They're not working down at the other end. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the basic story. So at 9 o'clock, I'll start with a Ranger talk. Runs about 10 minutes. And then we, as a group, will be singing the national anthem. What a better place than Mount Rushmore to sing our national anthem. Do not be shy. Even if you can't sing, we don't care. You need to be singing anyway. So do not hesitate to just join right in and singing. I got a couple nice young ladies that are going to get us started to make sure everything runs smooth. The whole program is going to run about 15, no more than 20 minutes. The last thing I'd like to remind everybody is our low speed limits. That is intentional because of wildlife. I like to say at Mount Rushmore, when the sun goes down, the animals come out. So when you're going home tonight in the dark, you may not see them, but there's going to be a lot of mule and whitetail deer up and down that highway. So slow down, follow the speed limit so both you and the deer get home safely tonight. All right, that's really it for announcements. So I'll be back with you to start this program rolling here in about 7 minutes. On January 20th, 1961, John F. Kennedy became the 35th President of the United States. He proceeded to give one of the most famous presidential speeches in our country's history. He concluded that speech by saying, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." But there's more to the story. The day before, a nor'easter slammed into the east coast of the United States and dumped 8 inches of snow on our nation's capital. Totally unaware what President Kennedy would say later in the day, 1,700 Boy Scouts braved the weather to assist the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and 1,000 District of Columbia employees clear the city streets. Those Boy Scouts, soldiers, and employees embodied President Kennedy's message. But they're not the only ones to stand up when their country needed them. You have no further to look than the faces around you. I'm speaking of the members and veterans of our armed forces. You also have no further to look than the 4 faces on the mountain. In 1775, 500 farmers, merchants, and craftsmen fired a shot heard around the world when they challenged the most respected army in the world, the British Army. After being reinforced by more Minutemen, that poorly organized and ragtag army besieged the British Army in Boston. Our Continental Congress asked George Washington to step up and take command of that army. Washington wrote his wife Martha he did not feel up to the task and had not sought the post, but felt, quote, "It was utterly out of my power to refuse," unquote. Through the terrible defeats at the Battle of Long Island and the Battle of Brandywine, through the miserable winters of Valley Forge and Morristown, George Washington, by sheer force of will, kept that army together. He kept that army together for 8 years until the British realized this was a fight they could not win. When the war was over, many came to George Washington and said, "Our young country is not ready for independence, let alone democracy. You need to crown yourself king." George Washington refused. He resigned his military commission and he returned to his beloved Mount Vernon. But our country wasn't through with George Washington. We needed him. We needed him to preside over the convention that wrote our Constitution. And then he returned to his beloved Mount Vernon. And again his country called upon him to be our first president. And then he returned to his beloved Mount Vernon. Henry Whitehorse Lee may have described Washington best when he wrote, "First in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen." In 1803, Thomas Jefferson sent James Monroe to France, wanted him to buy New Orleans. But instead, the French government offered us the entire Louisiana territory, more than 800,000 square miles, stretched from New Orleans all the way to the Rockies and beyond, all for only $15 million. But Thomas Jefferson questioned its constitutionality. Thomas Jefferson always believed in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. In 1803, he wrote, "The general government has no powers but such as the Constitution gives it." Article 4 of our Constitution does allow for the addition of new states, but says nothing about acquiring lands from foreign countries. In order for the Louisiana Purchase to be completed, Thomas Jefferson had to compromise one of his most sacredly held beliefs. Later, he called the Louisiana Purchase a great achievement. Thomas Jefferson doubled the size of our country, showed us how to acquire new lands without resorting to violence and conflict. In 1810, Jefferson wrote, "It is incumbent on those who accept great charges to risk themselves on great occasions." Less than 60 years later, our country would face its biggest challenge. Only 44 days after Abraham Lincoln was elected president, South Carolina withdrew from the Union. 4 days later, Abraham Lincoln wrote a friend, and in that letter he wrote, "I fully appreciate the present peril the country is in and the weight of responsibility on me." Through the terrible defeats at Bull Run, Wilson's Creek, Chickamauga, and other battles, through the bloody stalemates of Shiloh, Stones River, Wilderness, through the costly victories of Antietam and Gettysburg, Lincoln stood firm. During the darkest hours of the American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln had the moral courage to begin the process of freeing our country's slaves. In 1865, when it was obvious that the North would win the American Civil War, he said at his second inaugural address, quote, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, with the firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds." After the American Civil War, the Industrial Revolution totally changed the American culture, completely changed the ethnic composition of our cities, completely redistributed our nation's wealth, even changed the landscape itself. This new America was dominated by robber barons and their trusts. Our political system was controlled by political bosses and their political machines. The poor, the middle class, the working class, the underprivileged had little to no power in this new America. But the working class was getting organized. Unions. Reform movements were sweeping the nation. These unions and reform movements were on a collision course with the bosses. Strikes, violence broke out throughout the country. Many, including Theodore Roosevelt, felt our country was headed for another civil war. Theodore Roosevelt felt it was his moral obligation to help our country avoid such a conflict. In 1903, he wrote, "All I want is a square deal for every man." When Theodore Roosevelt was governor of New York, he abolished child labor. He limited hours for women workers. He reformed the state civil service system. He increased teacher salaries. He created new parks and forest preserves. As President of the United States, his foreign policy included the Great White Fleet, the Panama Canal, and winning the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the Russo-Japanese War. His domestic policy doubled the size of your national park system, added millions of acres to your national forest system. Theodore Roosevelt's impact to the presidency was so great, many historians today consider him our first modern president. In 1913, Roosevelt wrote, "I acted for the public, for the common well-being of all our people, whenever and in whatever manner was necessary, unless prevented by the Constitution." Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt. When their country needed them, they were there. So in conclusion, as President Kennedy said, and so my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country, my fellow citizens of the world. Ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do. I now invite you to sing along with our national anthem.
Stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite all members of our active Army and Armed Forces, along with any veterans that are with us, to please join us behind the U.S. flag in the open area between the flag and the ropes. Please step forward. It's hard to believe in our great country that so many of our members of the armed forces and veterans have never been publicly thanked for their willingness to serve. This might be their only opportunity. How about one more time we let them know how we feel about their willingness to serve.
That's like 19.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes tonight's program. I hope you had a wonderful time. Drive safely.